Good morning.
Good morning, Charles.
Let's do that one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
It is so good to see all of you here today in this space. And for those of you that are new here, welcome to the Community Church of Chesterland. My name is Charles Jefferson, and I will be serving as your lay leader for today's services this morning. And as we say always here in the United Church of Christ, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. No matter who you are, where you live, who you love, what your socioeconomic status is, any of that, you are welcome here in this space.
I'm Luann Gerhardt, and I would like to call us to worship. Your response is in bold. Welcome, beloved community, to this sacred space where we gather to celebrate the gifts of stewardship and the impact of our personal stories. Together, we come together to reflect on how our experiences and our actions can transform the world around us. We come with open hearts, ready to share, to give and receive. In the spirit of stewardship, we recognize that all we have is a gift from God, entrusted to us to nurture and to share. Our time, talents, and treasures are not ours alone, but are meant to be used for the greater good. We commit to using our resources wisely to care for creation and to support one another. Through sharing our journeys, we bear witness to the ways God is at work in our lives. Our stories of faith and struggle and hope inspire and encourage one another.
We lift our voices to share our experiences, knowing that in our vulnerability we find strength and connection.
Let us enter this time of worship with gratitude and joy, ready to be transformed by the Spirit and to transform the world through our stewardship and our shared stories. Amen.
Take my life, God, let it be consecrated faithfully. Take my ailment, my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my spirit, let it move at the impulse of your love. Take my intellect and use all its powers as you choose. Take my will, your will be done. Make your will and mine be one. Take my heart and by your grace make of it your dwelling place. Take my love and help it grow. Let my loving overflow. Take me now and help me be part of Christ's community.
Our ancient reading today is from 1 Corinthians 13, verses 8 through 13. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass. For we know in part, as we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Our modern reading comes from Cole Arthur Riley from their book, Black Liturgies, titled For Being Known. Divine community, we want to be known, and we're terrified of being known, of being laid bare in the presence of another. We are grateful that you are not a God who demands a spirituality rooted in some solitary existence, but it is hard to belong without allowing the direction of our lives to be dictated by those from whom we seek affirmation. Help us to daily discern the truth of our selfhood, that our communities would offer insight without commanding assimilation. As we find spaces that we truly see and know us, help us to not run from them. The more beautiful a thing is, the more terrified we are of losing it. Do not let this terror keep us from the love we were meant for. As we learn to accept friendship and care, may we be stirred to extend it to others. Keep us from contributing to loneliness and dislocation in the world, knowing that our freedom is mysteriously entwined with the freedom of those around us. Amen. Our stewardship moment is about stewardship and the gift of money and the gift of giving, whether that be financial gifts of money or gifts of treasures, gifts of trinkets, gifts of time, or gifts of being present and volunteering. This congregation is embedded in the stewardship of others and giving and being a part of the community at large. And it's one of the gifts of many gifts that attracted me to this congregation. And I am blessed that I'm able to give financially, and now I have the time to give more in a volunteer sort of way. So you have, I believe, a copy of these two, there's actually 4 graphs here. There's an overview graph in regard to our financial situation at this point in time. At the bottom, you'll see legends as well, too. And then if you flip it, and then to the left is the social justice summaries I spoke about just a moment ago about time and outreach that this church community does. And then on the back, you'll see on the right-hand side is the income to date. This is January through August at this point. And then again, the the legend is at the bottom, so you get an opportunity to see the money that's been collected to date and the money that we anticipate needing to spend for the remainder of the fiscal year. And then expenditures to date as well. And just a note, it does look like we're flush in money, but in reality, there's been a couple of significant memorial donations that have been given. Those are just kind of one and done shots, and so we can't depend on those extending past this fiscal year. So want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to see this, and if they have questions, they can ask Connie or come back and ask me or Meg, who's the moderator of the church. This week, Connie and I will be sending a letter out to you in addition to a copy of these legends, as we launch Stewardship Month and ongoing. So you'll get a letter from Connie and myself, in addition to a couple of other things that might be stuffed in the envelope, who knows. And I hope that you will consider the congregation in your gift giving.
Praise to the source of all we know, for peace and love that that freely flow. Praise to the wisdom deep and wise, whose truth and justice open eyes. Amen.
Today's sort of theme or topic is the power of testimony. And as some of you that I talked to, you may remember that I said that I would be sort of sharing a little bit about my own story and my own journey with the hopes that it might inspire someone else. So we know that there is great power in storytelling. For centuries, the stories of God's creation in the earliest Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, Jacob and his sons were passed down from generation to generation, telling the greatness of God until it could be copied down in written form. Jesus himself often spoke in stories or parables, which allowed him to show his humanity, while at the same time allowed him to pass on important spiritual and theological truths to his followers. Even today, telling stories continues to be a vital instrument in the church as we share with one another the ways that God is at work in our lives as a testimony that God is still on the move, or as we say here in the United Church of Christ, God is still speaking. There is power in sharing our stories. Now, it can be easy to shy away from telling our stories for fear of judgment, comparison, or even rejection. But our God is a God who calls us to be known and to be in community with one another. As our scripture from 1 Corinthians chapter 13 reminds us, each one of us is on a journey with God. When we were children, we talked, thought, and reasoned like children. And as we grew in Christ, we began to understand, to reason, think, and look more like Christ. However, none of us have reached our end goal. None of us are at this idea of Christian perfection. None of us are done working to be more Christ-like. Now, we can only see in part, but when we are made complete in Christ, then we will see in full. And until we reach that point, God has given us the gifts of faith, hope, and love as ways to experience God's grace in the here and now, at this point in our journey, in this chapter of our story. Now, I'm going to be a little vulnerable and go off script here and share a little bit about my journey in hopes that it inspires you to share your own testimony, because you never know who might be listening and whose life you can impact. So let me start off with this. So remember this name, Rosie Guider, Guider. That's the woman that I know as my grandmother. She's no longer with us in the physical, but she was born in the 1940s in a small town called Isola, Mississippi. They still, I believed, even up until that point, picked cotton and things like that. And like many Black Americans in the 1960s, she migrated up north, eventually ending up in Chicago, where she had her children and raised her family. She had 3 children, a daughter, Dorothy, a son, his name is Eddie, he's also no longer with us, and another daughter, her name is Kimberly. Dorothy is the woman that I know as my mother. And there's a reason that I say that, and that is because I'm kind of sort of adopted, but not really, because, my last name is Jefferson. My siblings have a different last name than me because they have the same father. I have a different father. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But my birth mother, her name is Tracy. Don't really know too much about her. I do know she's in her 50s. Obviously, she did not raise me. But she got into some legal issues and ended up in prison. So she was pregnant with a child in prison. And on November the 17th of 1991 at 6:29 in the morning, she gave birth to a baby boy in St. Mary's Hospital in Streator, Illinois. But she was incarcerated. And so they said to her, you know, the people at the hospital, you know, do you have someone who could take custody, guardianship of this child? And she said, you know, I know a woman, you know, she has two of my other sons, you know, by another gentleman that I was with, Eddie. And I think she might be able to take custody of this child, Rosie, that woman. So Tracy had to go back to jail to serve out the remainder of her sentence. And so they called Rosie and they said, Miss Guider, Tracy gave birth, as you may know, she was pregnant and gave birth to this baby boy. And she listed you as the guardian caretaker of this child. Is this a responsibility, something that you are willing to accept and take on? And without hesitation, Rosie, as she did throughout her life, said yes, because it was important to her that, you know, the siblings stayed together and had a relationship. And so they said, okay, well, you have 2 days from today's date. Now, that was November the 17th. So they say you have until November the 19th to come and get this baby, or else we're going to have to turn him over to Child Protective Services. So she said, okay, no problem. So she went into action mode, as she often did. And, you know, she called her friend, his name, now forgive me, because I cannot remember his real name, but his nickname was Spooky. S-P-O-O-K-Y, Spooky, okay? So and rest his soul, and maybe I have family that are watching that may, you know his real name. But she called Spooky and said, I need you to help me out with something. You know, I need to go and get this baby from the hospital. It was about so many miles, I think, southwest of the city of Chicago. I'll give you $100 and I'll give you a full tank of gas. Can you get me out to this place so I can get this baby? And so at the time in Chicago, this was 1991, there was a store called Goldblatt's. So it was, you know, regular department store where you can get clothing and furniture and all those types of things. And so she went to Goldblatt's and she got a car seat and clothes and, you know, all those things that you need in order to take a baby home. And so she did that. She got together with her friend Spooky and drove out to Streator to get this new baby boy. Now, something that I didn't mention before is that, again, this was 1991. And so my grandmother Rosie purchased a house that September and moved in October the 1st of 1991. And then if you didn't put two and two together, then here comes me on November the 17th, this brand new baby that is thrown into the equation. And so from 1991 until 2018, this house, 952 North Keystone in Chicago, Illinois, played a significant role in my upbringing, because throughout, you know, my journey, as things have shifted and things changed, that house and my grandmother were some of the people and things that remained a constant. So, you know, I was born on November 17th, 6:29 in the morning, got there maybe a day or two later, and, you know, and that was pretty much that. And, you know, I had, I would say, a pretty normal childhood. You know, you all know that I grew up on the west side of Chicago, inner city. It's actually a section of Humboldt Park. That's the neighborhood. We called it K-Town because all the streets from east to west. I think it's about 11 or 12 streets. They all start with the letter K. And so that particular section that I lived in, Keystone and Augusta to be specific, was just the cornerstone of my childhood. Like I said, I had a pretty normal childhood, did, the pretty, normal kid things. And, growing up in the inner city of Chicago, I also, saw things that, perhaps a child shouldn't see, like drive-bys and, drug activities and things like that. But I want you all to understand that that was not something that I would say was a common occurrence, because on our particular block of the 900 block of Keystone, like in Chicago, I don't know about here in Cleveland, if they have like block clubs and like block parties like in the summer, but we would have block parties and things like that. And so we were a really tight-knit community, a tight-knit block. And, those things I still think about, to this day. Like most kids, as you, come into your own, you start to develop interests and, things that you want to do. And, I think, most kids, when they grow up, they want to be a, teacher, doctor, lawyer, those types of things like that. But for some reason, I kind of went in another direction. And I'm going to tell you another goofy story. I wanted to be a talk show host. And so in Chicago, I want you all to know that in the city of Chicago, in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, we were probably the talk show capital, if you will. So back in the 70s, I think Phil Donahue taped his program at WGN-TV, which I worked at many, many years later. But we also had 3 very popular syndicated talk shows that were filmed in the city of Chicago. We had Jenny Jones. Does anybody remember Jenny Jones from back in the day? Jerry Springer. Who knows Jerry Springer? All right. And then, of course, we had the Queen Bee, Oprah Winfrey. Jenny Jones and Jerry Springer, they taped downtown at the NBC Tower, which is where the NBC station and some other television operations are. And then Oprah, of course, had her own studio on, we say the West Side, but it's actually the West Loop. And Oprah is pretty much credited with turning the West Loop into, the, I guess, Mecca it is today, because before then it was like meat packing plants and like, industrial. And then she came over there and really kind of turned that around. Anyway, I saw this, and for some reason I was just drawn toward this. And I guess, that's the reason why I was so interested in other people and people's stories. In elementary school, we would go to the library, and, we would be able to take out a couple of books. And I was always drawn toward the biographies. There was this series, it was called Black Americans of Achievement. And it just, chronicled the biographies of Black Americans in entertainment and in science and in academia and all these different aspects. And I was just always very curious just about, people's stories and, where people came from and how things worked. And, that sort of started me, on that journey. And, I went so far with the talk show thing. So, and if any of my relatives were here, they'll tell you that I kind of went overboard with this. But, I was so infatuated with just the world of talk shows and how all of that worked, that I turned my bedroom into like a TV studio. Like, I designed like my own show logo, and I had like, a stage set up with like, I had stuffed animals or something, toy dolls or whatever I had at the time. And those would be my audience members and my guests. And I had something that was similar to a microphone. And, I would just be in this room doing my thing, like making stuff up, because I was just that infatuated with these talk shows. I don't do that still today, but I just want people to know. But yeah, that just kind of started me off on this curiosity, being able to tell stories, being able to connect with people. I think it just gave me that natural curiosity. I would say that first part of my childhood, was pretty normal. Did the normal, childhood things, and I think that when things really started to shift for me was probably right around 2002, January 2003. So you remember my Aunt Kimberly that I mentioned earlier. So my grandmother, at one point in time, there were a lot of people in this house. And so my grandmother was, kind of overwhelmed. And so my Aunt Kimberly, she got an opportunity at Illinois State University. Anybody familiar with Normal, Illinois? So, so people often ask me, is it normal in Normal? It's been over 20 years since I've been there. I think it's a pretty normal place. I don't know what's happened down there since then, but yeah. So she got into some sort of, I think, teaching program or something at Illinois State University and was en route to relocate down there. And the decision was made at the time that, me and my brother Sean would go and live, with my Aunt Kimberly and her husband, or her then husband, in Normal, Illinois. And this was sort of my first time that I experienced change on such I think, a big scale, because you take a kid, black kid, from the west side of Chicago, where I'm around pretty much, all black and even some Hispanic people, and then you move to a place called Normal, Illinois, where it is overwhelmingly white, and you become one of only few, if not the only, black kid in the classroom. And that was sort of the first time of some self-discovery. It made me really sort of see, I think, the discrepancies, when it comes to, life in Normal, Illinois versus the west side of Chicago, and just, things that I saw and, opportunities that I saw people have. And it also just showed me that, the world is I think, a much bigger place than the west side of Chicago. Let me jump forward a little bit and just say that I don't think it's an uncommon thing that, people grow up in a particular area and they, stay there for, much, if not all of their lives. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing. But I've often said, and even as I, been here in Cleveland, you should probably move away from your hometown at least once. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But, and this was also my only sort of, my first exposure to white people other than my teachers. I didn't go to school with, white classmates, and, I didn't have white friends because I didn't live in that kind of neighborhood. I lived in a predominantly black area and went to a predominantly black school. And so I didn't have any of these experiences. And like I said, it was one of only few black kids in the class. And we ended up staying there for about 3.5 years, and it was fine. I'm still in touch with some of the people that I met there. But, I definitely was longing to get back to some sorts of what I would say normalcy, right? Some, sense of familiar, because that was very unfamiliar to me. And that wouldn't be my first time that I would be in a situation that, was unfamiliar to me. But eventually we ended up coming back to Chicago, and eventually we ended up in the Chicago suburb of Evanston, Northwestern University, anybody? Home of the Wildcats. If you went to ETHS and then went to Northwestern, you are known as a Kit Kat, fun fact. I did not end up going to Northwestern. I went to Columbia College, Chicago. You can talk to me later about Columbia. I love Columbia. I'm not too happy with some of the decisions that they made, but that'll be a whole nother sermon about the state of higher education in the United States. Stay tuned for that. So we ended up coming to Evanston, and let me tell you, Evanston Township High School, at this point I was a freshman in high school. In Evanston Township High School is unlike any place that I've ever been in my entire life, and still to this day. ETHS, or Evanston Township High School, is known as or at least physically, is known as the largest high school in the United States under one roof. So total, it's about 1.2 million square feet of space. They have about like 18 or so different gyms. They have 4 main wings, and way back in like the 70s, like each wing was like a grade level. So like the freshmen had their own wing, sophomores, juniors, seniors, and like that. Now it's just, like one whole school. And also, this was the first time that I experienced many different people, from all different kinds of life. Not only were there, black students and white students, there were also Asian students. Evanston has a very big Jamaican and Haitian population, so there were a lot of Jamaican and Haitian immigrants that lived in Evanston. Biracial students. The spectrum was wide in terms of nationalities. And so I get to ETHS, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, I have no idea what any of this is. The school is very large. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to get lost. I'm going to be late. And so my first day there, I'm early. So I get there because I'm like, I want to be on time, or at least try to get a seat, because they said, typically in high school, there are no assigned seats or anything like that. So I was like, I can get there early, stand in front of my classroom and, try to find a seat. But little did I know, you all remember what I said earlier about the 4 main wings. And so I have my schedule, and I go up to one of the security guards and I said, hey, can you help me find room 312? Now, this might sound a little strange to you all. He says back to me, well, what room 312? And so I kind of looked at him like this. I didn't put my hands on my hips because I was just so nervous and just out of sorts. And I said back to him like, oh, what do you mean? Like, what 312? There's more than one room 312 in this school? And then he, bless his soul, he was like, you must be new here. And he was like, you need to pay attention to the letters, because each wing represents a direction. So north, south, east, west. And he said, are you going to north 312, south 312, east 312, or west 312? And I said, well, okay, let me look back at the schedule, because I didn't think those letters meant anything. So I was like, okay, it says west 312. So he said, west is orange. I think north was red, east was blue, and then south was green. Don't ask me why I remember that. But he was like, you want to go down this hallway and up, and when you see the orange, you're in the right space, and just pay attention to the numbers and all that. But for that first year that I was at ETHS, it was really like an out-of-body experience. I mean, I was really, kind of shy and, kept to myself and didn't really know too many people. I didn't really have too many friends at that time, just because I was just so nervous, and it was just such a, new thing for me. But I think being at ETHS really started me on, this self-discovery sort of journey. And so, eventually, I became involved, my sophomore year, became involved in the school and did, different things. And, I was hosting the school's annual talent show, and I was on student council, and I wrote for my school newspaper and did all those things. My school newspaper is where I discovered, the power of journalism. And I actually still have some clips from articles that I've written back in high school. Actually, when at my senior year, when we were looking at colleges and whatnot, and when we were putting together my schedule, my counselor, her name is Denise Chaikin. She said that, because I wanted to do driver's ed and then work on the Evanstonian, that's the school newspaper. And she said, well, you can't do both because it's going to conflict. And she was like, well, what do you, want to do? And I said, well, I don't want to leave this building without having written for my high school newspaper. So that's more important to me because I can learn how to drive and take a driver's ed course anytime. I won't be able to do this again. So I chose my high school newspaper, the Evanstonian, and that's where I met my now departed staff advisor over the Evanstonian. His name was Rodney Lowe, another black man who I think really inspired me or really showed me sort of the power, I think, of storytelling and not only sharing your story, but being able to effectively tell someone else's story through the lens of journalism. Funny thing about the driver's ed is that I didn't get my driver's license until 2 years ago. So that shows you how much of a priority that was on my list. And then after high school, graduated, all of that, worked over the summer. I actually worked at my high school. I worked in an office called the Book Distribution Center. This is where all the textbooks and things like that came into, or barcode stamped, and then we were able to, put orders out to teachers and administrators who required textbooks for courses. And that gave me my first sort of taxable paycheck. So I learned about taxes, and I was like, oh, they take that much out. Okay, I didn't think about that, but all right, that's okay. Making money and being able to, manage a budget and all those things, and that was all good. Went to college, ended up at Columbia College Chicago, as you all heard me say earlier, and Columbia was great. I had a great time at Columbia. And met some wonderful people, many of whom some might be watching, the service this morning, and people that I'm still very much connected to and I would consider good friends. And I majored in journalism. Surprise, surprise, and ended up working for my college newspaper, the Columbia Chronicle, which was voted time and time again as the #1 non-daily newspaper in the country. So I'm proud to have been a part of that legacy and won a couple of local awards myself for some of my multimedia pieces that I did, or actually, that's actually not true. I actually got nominated but didn't win, but nonetheless I'll take a nomination. If you're ever at my house and you're in my office area, I have 2 plaques for nominations for regional Emmys for my college practicum. It was a course called Newsbeat, and that's where we essentially put on a actual television newscast. And we were nominated several times for Emmys. I don't think while I was there we won, but they would give you these certificates acknowledging that you were nominated, because it's a big thing to be nominated. And I kept those and I framed them, and they're in my office because I was like, hey, at least I was nominated, and I can say that much. And then college was great. Went at college and had a couple internships. Interned with, I'm not sure how many of you all are familiar with Bill Curtis. Bill Curtis he did the voiceover for Anchorman, the first Anchorman movie. And he is a well-known Chicago anchor, a TV news anchor and journalist. And he has a production company, Curtis Productions, in Chicago, and they produced the show on NBC. It's called American Greed, if anybody's familiar with that show. And actually, another fun fact, I made my first TV appearance on American Greed as an extra. It was like a bank robbery that we were recreating, and I was in there, and I think I may have the CD of that somewhere in my stuff. So if you're ever interested in that, let me know. Well, I'll find it out for you. I also didn't tell you, that while I was in high school, I did a thing called, I was in a production of Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And guess who I played? And it was not Joseph. I was Jacob. So I have photos, and there may be some video out there that exists of me, singing and dancing on this stage at King Lab in Evanston, but I may have to do something if you want to see that. It's in the vault somewhere, so yeah. So went to Columbia, graduated from Columbia. Started my career as a journalist. I worked for PBS, the local PBS station in Chicago, WTTW. They have a show on their public affairs show. It's called Chicago Tonight, and worked with, I think, some pretty esteemed journalists and producers. I was a web producer, and I did it as a freelance position. So for that first, I would say 9 or so months after I graduated, I did a lot of freelance things. So I worked at WTTW, did some freelance, writing, editing, and did some freelance video work. And then eventually Columbia called me back and said, hey, would you be interested in co-running our high school journalism program? It was a program called Columbia Links, which was geared toward Chicago area high school students who had an interest in a career in journalism and media. So I said, okay. So I did that for about a year. And then in true Columbia fashion, and said, don't get me started on Columbia, that's another sermon. The program was, as they said, sunsetted, right? So at that point, I experienced my first layoff. I was like, oh, Lord, I don't have a job. I need some money. I have no idea, what to do here. And that was pretty, that sucked. Because it was a really, I think, great program. And, we did a lot for, I think, Chicago area high school students who had, interest in journalism, and giving them exposure to a college campus, and, pairing them up with actual journalists to write stories and report on things that are interested or that are of interest to them. And so I was really sad to, more so sad to kind of see a program that had so much legacy just go away without fanfare. But, I had to shift away from that because I'm like, oh, I need a job. I need some money. I got to make some money. So long story short, ended up at a place called Chicago Theological Seminary. It is a UCC affiliated seminary in Chicago's Hyde Park area. And they hired me as their communications and marketing coordinator. And it was my first foray into the world of communications, marketing, and PR. And there at Chicago Theological Seminary, I met a person. You all may know this person. Their name is Jess Peacock. And, I mentioned this to Jess years later, because I thought that Jess was, maybe 35, 40, something like that at the time. And I was really surprised to find out that not only, I think they were like 45 or something at the time when we first met, but they also had, children my age. And I was like, you just give off such a youthful energy, spirit. And I think that's one of the great things about Jess. I'll say more about Jess later because Jess really plays, I think, an important role in my journey. So, I was at CTS for 3 years. And then from there, I went, to a number of places before eventually ending up at a Catholic high school as their director of marketing and communications. Holy Trinity High School, a small independent Catholic high school on Chicago's west side still, but Wicker Park area, if anyone has been to Chicago and is familiar with that. I never thought that I would leave Chicago. I was one of those people, people often say, if you live in Chicago, go to Chicago, you never leave Chicago. Well, let me be a perfect example and say that people do leave Chicago. It's totally fine, and there's life beyond Chicago. Chicago is a wonderful city. It's a great city full of great people, great institutions. It will always be home for me, but I have a new home. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Also, in this period, I lost my grandmother, Rosie. She died kind of suddenly in 2015, and I remember that day quite well. She was due for knee replacement surgery and became immobile. And one day I had went, around the corner to this restaurant to get something to eat, and I came back, and I think my brother was there, and he was like, "Hey, something's wrong with Granny." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she had got up, went to the bathroom, and so she had what was called a pulmonary embolism. Anybody familiar with that? It's also the same thing that killed my older brother, I think, several years before that. But because she was so immobile for those couple of weeks leading up to this knee replacement surgery, she developed something, deep vein thrombosis. And then when she got up, the blood clot traveled to her lungs, and it just killed her. She didn't die in the house, but en route to the hospital, because I was originally going to, ride in the ambulance with her to the hospital, but her condition was kind of deteriorating, and so they said that, I couldn't ride in the ambulance. So we get to the hospital, they take us to the room, that room, and I just knew that this was it, and life was about to change. And that was, my first real sort of, experience with death, and death of someone who meant so much to me. If you ever come to my house, you'll walk into the living room and you'll see right in the middle, there's a portrait of my grandmother. It was from, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. This is probably one of my most favorite photos of her. And I have it there just as a symbol of what she meant to me. And I often credit her with saving my life, because who knows, had she not come to that hospital, on that day, who knows where I would be. I can tell you that it's because of her that I stand here in front of you all today. And not to say that my life would have been any less successful had I not ended up in her care, but, my mind sometimes wonder about what my life could have been if she didn't, take that risk and take that chance. July of 2022. So actually, I had been coming here to Cleveland because at the time I was, dating someone, and, Jess was here, newly installed pastor, and had been coming to Cleveland and been familiar with it. And then in July of 2022, I got a call from the national ministries of the United Church of Christ, and they said, "We would like for you to come and lead our marketing and communications office here at the national ministries. You'll be based here in Cleveland." And they asked me when could I start, and I think that was like July 8th. And I officially moved here August 1. So in a span of several weeks, I took a big leap and moved from Chicago, my longtime home that I thought I would never leave, and came here to the land. And I am very glad that I did, because I think in the last 2 years that I've been here, I've learned a lot about myself, a lot more about myself than I think that I would have if I was still in Chicago. So came here. So as you can imagine, that whole second half of 2022 was just, it was just a lot. New job, new city, new place, just new everything. But I figured it out and, did that to the best of my ability. And I think I succeeded pretty well. And then in July or June of 2023 was a moment where I looked death right in the face. I think most of you were here during that time, and you remember that I was hospitalized when I found out that I was diabetic. And what a hell of a way to find out that you were diabetic. The week leading up to that, I was experiencing all different types of symptoms that I just thought that at that time there was some sort of bug that was going around, and I thought I had that. Sleep it off, rest for a couple of days, and then I would be able to move on. Little did I know that these were all symptoms of a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a life-threatening condition of diabetes. And, I was messaging Jess, and I said, I'm not feeling too well, could you, maybe go to the store and get me a couple things and, all of that. And so Jess went shopping for me, brought the stuff over, and they said, if you're still not feeling well by tomorrow, by this time it's Thursday, still not feeling well by tomorrow, give me a call and, we'll get you to the doctor. So I said, okay, I'm hoping that I could, get through all this. But Friday, I think I was in the worst shape that I've ever been in my nearly 33 years on this planet. Was having a hard time catching my breath. Couldn't stand up without, stumbling over. And I knew that I was in real trouble. And so I messaged Jess. Actually, I think it was, Jess, myself, Charlie, and Maria. We were on some group chat. And I messaged Jess first, and I said, I'm really not doing too well. I think something is wrong, and I think I need to go to the doctor. So Jess had other plans, but said, I'll be over as soon as I can. Got me to the doctor, and I was in real bad shape. Just couldn't really breathe, couldn't really stand. It was just a struggle to put on a pair of pants. We get to urgent care, that's where we went first. We get to urgent care. The urgent care people were like, we can't find a pulse for him. We can't find a pulse. He needs to go to the emergency room. We think this is diabetic ketoacidosis, but we need to get him to the emergency room now because his condition is just going downhill fast. So that was my first time in an ambulance because I had to be transported from that urgent care facility over to Cleveland Clinic Hospital in Fairview. Shout out to Cleveland Clinic Hospital. It's probably some of the best medical care that I've ever received. Shameless plug for Cleveland Clinic. But, I was there in the hospital, hooked up to all these IVs, really low energy, just all out of sorts. And I was in intensive care for about 3 days. So that was Friday, and then Sunday afternoon, I think, or Monday, is when I was transferred to a general care room. And it wasn't looking too good, for those first 24 hours. And the doctor said, and I still have trouble wrapping my head around this, it said, had it been 7 or 8 more hours, then you probably wouldn't be here. And I probably think my greatest fear, not dying, but having someone discover me and, that person living with that. And I think we all know, about, sudden death. Our friend Alan Dowling, who was only 31 when he passed. And so that is, not lost on me at all, that, I am still here and still standing before you all today. And so that made me just realize that there are some things that I was prioritizing that I didn't need to, and that I can really be true to myself. And I felt that I had a sort of this new lease on life. And I'm still on that journey of self-discovery and figuring out who I am and figuring out, what my place is. And so I say all that to say, everybody has a story. What's your story? You never know who's listening and whose life you may impact. That's all she wrote. Thank you all so much. May it be so.
Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love, and do what thou wouldst do. Breathe on me, breath of God, until my heart is pure, until thee I will to do and to endure. Breathe on me, breath of God, till I am wholly thine, until the earthly parts of me glows with thy fire divine.
This is it. This is the end of our time here today. So as we depart this place, I would like to send you all forth with this benediction. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rains wash away your worries, and the breeze blow new strength into your being. In all of the days of your life, may you walk gently through the world and know its beauty. May it be so. Amen. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful week.